So we've been talking about different ways in which you can make representations of data and how you can analyze your data. The next thing I want to talk about is how do you go about running some of the statistical analyses for your data. For example, many of you are going to likely run correlations. If you have two continuous variables, so let's say I've got one variable called social media score, so how much they're using social media or how important it is to them. And let's say I have another variable that is on extroversion, so how outgoing, how talkative, how much do I like meeting new people. I bet some of you wish you had the opportunity to talk to new people at this point. But so let's go ahead and take a look at how we might run that. So remember, in Excel or in Google Sheets, the way you do that is using the equals C-O-R-R, oops, let's try that again, equals C-O-R-R-E-L function, open parentheses. Then you need to highlight the two sets of data you want to compare. So the first one is going to be my social media scores. So I can start anywhere, top or the bottom, and I'm just going to highlight all of the participants. Then I'm going to put a comma. Then after I've had the comma, I'm going to go down and I'm going to highlight the other set of data that I have. Again, you need to make sure that you've got the same number of arguments, the same number of participants in each one. If you're missing data in some of the cells, it may not necessarily work correctly. So you can see here, add the closed parentheses, so equals C-O-R-R-E-L, and then I highlight the first set of data, put a comma, and then I highlight the second set of data. And again, it's going to give me a correlation coefficient. You should remember at this point that correlation coefficients range from 0 to 1.0, and of course they can either be positive or negative depending on the type of correlation. So I run the correlation coefficient, and what I find is the correlation coefficient is 0.012. So that means that the correlation between social media score and extroversion is almost zero, right? It's just barely above zero. So that is not likely going to be a statistically significant correlation. You can see here that I've got, so row 1 is my header row, so I don't count that. But if I want to know my number of total participants here, I've got 171 rows. Of which, of course, this first one doesn't count because it's just the name of the variable. So I've got 170 participants, so n equals 170. My correlation coefficient is 0.012. There we go. So now what I need to figure out is what is the correlation coefficient. So I need to figure out the p-value of this correlation coefficient. P-value calculator. So I type in the p-value calculator for correlations, and it's going to be the very first one you see. Quick p-value Pearson R calculation. So you put in the R value, which is 0.012, as we calculated before. My N is 170 because I have 170 participants. Your significance level, you may remember from your stats class, your significance level is the probability that you're making a type 1 error, that you've concluded that there is a difference when in fact there is not. It's what's called a false positive, that you actually think that there's a statistically significant difference when in fact there's not. So first of all, remember this R value, this R score is almost zero. So this suggests to me that in fact there shouldn't be any correlation coefficient, that there shouldn't be any significance level. So the traditional significance level we use is 0.05. So you're going to keep this right here where it is, and you're going to hit calculate. And we're going to see the p-value is 0.8765. If your number is greater than the 0.05, that means the result is not statistically significant. So that means there's no statistically significant correlation between their social media score and how extroverted they are, okay? So it didn't work. So we did not find there's a statistically significant correlation. So I need a couple of things. I need to remember what this p-value is. So I'm going to copy it, and I'm going to put it over here, okay? Then when we are going to report our correlation coefficients in your results and in your presentations, the way you're going to include those is you're going to have an R number, and then in parentheses you put the number of subjects you had, so 170 in parentheses equals 0.012. That was our R value, and then you're going to put a comma, and you're going to put P is greater than 0.05. In this case, you could even put it's greater than 0.86. So what that means is that you do not have a statistically significant correlation, not statistically significant, which means there is no, let me see if I can fix it, significant. Let's try that again. So that means that there is no correlation between their social media score and their extroversion score, okay? Unlike what you might have suggested in your original hypothesis, or the researchers might have suggested in this original study. Okay, so the way you're going to report correlation coefficients is using this R with the number of participants in parentheses equal to whatever your correlation coefficient is, right? So this is your R value, by the way. So just so you know, this is your correlation coefficient is also called an R value. Hopefully you remember that from stats, but I know it's you may not necessarily jump to the top of your head right now. And then your p-value tells you whether or not this is a statistically significant correlation. It has to be lower than 0.05. So you want your correlation coefficients to be high, to be closer to 1 or -1. And you want your p-values to be low, to be closer to 0. What that means is that you can be pretty confident, if your p-value is closer to 0, you can be confident that there is a statistically significant correlation between the two variables that you're measuring. Okay, in this case, we do not have that. People that are more on social media, that value social media, are not necessarily more extroverted. In fact, you might have even made the opposite prediction, right? That people, in fact, who are on social media more frequently and value it more, maybe are less extroverted. They're more introverted. But we didn't even see that, right? To see that, to find a relationship between low extroversion scores and high social media scores, we would have needed to see a negative correlation, and we didn't have that. We had a correlation closer to 0. Okay. Please, hopefully that gets you started on making correlation coefficients. You can correlate any of your variables you're interested in, but run those correlations and let's see what pops out.